FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
There are only two ways to determine whether something is state policy. Sometimes, if we're lucky enough, we can find a bunch of documents that came from the top down and said, authorize this stuff. Go ahead and do it, right? The problem with those documents often is that they're very limited. They use this hyper-legal language that turns out to have no correspondence to what actually happened on the ground. So, for example, in the Bybee memo, we read that there are 13 authorized techniques. Well, there are a lot more other techniques that are being used on the ground, right? Likewise, not surprisingly, in the Bradbury memo 3 years later, all of a sudden there are 17 techniques, right? This is one of the classic slippery slopes, because once you authorize torture, even if you do it in a tried and controlled way, three things happen. The number of victims that you're allowed to torture increases, the number of techniques that people use also increase, and the units that are authorized to torture become increasingly less responsive to central command. This classically happened with the Gestapo. If any of you have any interest in this at all, you will find online, thanks to Andrew Sullivan, the Gestapo interrogation memo from 1942. And it says, Gestapo Chief Mueller says, we only are going to arrest the following subgroups of people, and we're only going to use stress position, sleep deprivation, and exhaustion exercises. Right? Now, there's no relationship between this memo and what the Gestapo actually did in all these other places. The other way that we can assess whether something was systematic, and in human rights monitoring, this is the standard, it's this, is that when we have multiple accounts of people in different places who describe exactly the same range of techniques, then we can say that something was standard operating procedure, because this could not have happened in the absence of that. Thus, for example, we can say, in the American case very early on, that the high level of consistency between Afghanistan, Iraq, Guantanamo suggests that there was a standard operating procedure. Whereas, guess what? Gestapo techniques were not. Gestapo actually fragmented, and because they used so many of the local guys, you know, the German Gestapo used the French in France, and they used the Croatians in the Balkans. Every culture brought their own set of torture techniques to the process. So what we find in the Gestapo case is that torture wasn't a systematic policy, and this isn't my determination. This is actually the determination at Nuremberg. The only case of organized torture which was brought down at Nuremberg was against Kaltenbrunner for organized torture in the camps. Because in the camps you saw consistently, regardless of place and time, exactly the same things. The problem with Gestapo is that we can't find any of their documents, but that doesn't prevent us from saying that it's a policy. So if you want to know how something is a policy, that's the way.